Hello, everybody, and welcome to Three Steps Ahead. This is a business strategy podcast for business leaders looking to make smarter decisions and stay 3 steps ahead. My name's Martin Gibbs, and I'm joined today by my usual collaborator, Simon Cossey.
Good morning.
Simon, before we dive in too much deeper, you have an addition to the family since the last episode.
Since the last episode, I've become a grandfather, not granddad, I should say.
Congratulations.
Far too young to be a grandfather, Simon.
I keep telling everybody that, but it's amazing. So my daughter's had a baby girl, which is
Oh,
a
wow.
brilliant addition to the family. Yes. So we were away for a couple of weeks visiting. So
Brilliant.
first
Well,
first
congratulations.
big thing I'm back doing is a Three Steps Ahead podcast. So
Mother
yeah,
and baby
brilliant.
both doing well, I hope.
Mother and baby are both doing well. Absolutely.
Okay, Simon. And Rob Harrison. Rob is a special guest today, and Rob comes from Glued, a Stratford-upon-Avon-based marketing company. There's two parts to what Glued do. It's all about connecting people. Firstly, it's through clear and honest marketing. And then in recent years, they've also been focusing on something called Teams Glued, which is all about retaining the best staff and overcoming conflict. And there's a big VR element included in what Rob and his partner David Wilson do with Teams Glued. So today's episode is all about something that Rob calls the competence cliff, why good managers still seem to fail under pressure. So Rob, thank you for joining us.
Thank
Tell us a
you.
little bit about Teams Glued then.
Yes, so Teams Glued plays into that notion that we all lean into our preferred behavioral inclinations, particularly under pressure, rather than reflecting upon how might I behave in these circumstances to bring about a better outcome. And that's really all it plays into. And that can have an impact domestically, professionally, whatever it might be. And in simple terms, that's what it plays into. But what it does use, as you rightly say, is a tantalizing bit of virtual reality escape room scenario, and then behavioral modeling overlaid on that. And then we bring to it competition, teamwork, and yeah, a bit of jeopardy to bring the pressure up
Bit of
and allow
jeopardy.
us to trial those, to give us the opportunity to trial different ways of behaving to bring about a different outcome.
So jumping into this then, Rob, pressure changes behavior.
Yes, strange actually. What it does, it brings out, for many people, it brings out just our natural inclinations, our knee-jerk responses, rather than considered or reflected responses. And that's really, I suppose,
Yeah.
what we're trying to test with Teams Glued is, can we actually take a moment, step back, reflect, and do something different that might bring about a better outcome?
It is difficult because, in a work scenario, something comes up and it can immediately bring up a conflict. The flight or fight reaction jumps in. It isn't necessarily that easy to step back and reflect in the moment.
No, absolutely. And actually, I was doing a bit of preparation for this and came up with a fourth F. So we've got fright, flight, freeze, and also fawn,
Okay.
which is
Okay.
you become obsequious to the person or the problem that's kind of like confronting you, and you try and placate it and get on side with it and whatnot. There are the four possible, and they probably reflect the four different sort of behavioral types that we bring to the Teams Glued scenario.
I mean, this is as you mentioned, the competence cliff. It's knowing is leading. Why good managers fail under pressure. I mean, something that Martin will like is I found a quote which I think is really good. It's from a man I don't personally know, but Tim Gould, a former professional cyclist. Um, and he said, I've been promoted to middle management, never thought I'd sink so low. And I thought that really encapsulated it because we're talking about this bit in the middle quite frequently. The management element is thrust upon people. globally or nationally, it's recognised as, progression in your career, but often that's just, thrust into it where really you have no particular inclination necessarily or skills in that area. So the work that goes on in that middle management piece is absolutely critical to driving UK PLC forward and probably needs more attention than it gets already.
And it's part of the human condition to want to progress, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we all want to be, or feel we ought to be ambitious and want to be ambitious. So we become competent in our current role. Our seniors believe we can therefore take the next step, but don't necessarily give us the skills, the confidence to then be able to do that. And if it's going from the coalface to managing people, it's a very different role. It's a role where you have to abstract yourself from the how do I do it to how do I get other people to do it.
Well, I think there's two aspects to that, Rob. And one is obviously there's succession. And I think there's succession for, let me say, succession's sake. I need someone to take over from me so I can go and do something different. And whether that's the right person, that view of succession changes. Interestingly, you mentioned that, and that's perhaps, given our maturity on this podcast, I was found some really interesting information. It's called the conscious unbossing, and I know that we have spoken about this kind of thing on other podcasts. Gen Z, 52% of them do not want to manage. 72% would choose an individual route to progression over a management route to progression. And you think, well, that's a bit concerning because whatever business you're in, you're going to have some young people. And whether we like it or not, something we can't get away from is, generally speaking, younger people take over from older people. It's a fact of life.
And what I was going to ask them was that is there anything else in that research or in what you found there that says that those young people also don't want to be managed?
What it did say, I think it reflected more. These are just some stats I found, and it's talked about nearly two-thirds of them say the reason they don't want to manage is because they think it's too highly stressed and low reward. Yeah, fascinating. But I think generally speaking, that not wanting to manage could well translate into not wanting to be managed. Big shift towards flatter, less hierarchical sort of structures in businesses as well, which is key. And I think that's where they see themselves working. And interesting, obviously, you're called Team Glued, which couldn't be more appropriate because it references a more team-based approach to management.
So, Rob, why is becoming a manager harder than people think? From my perspective, my background obviously is in accounting firms, and the way that you progress in accounting firms is you have to start off by being technically good at the job that you do, and then at some stage you end up managing people or become a partner in the firm. But all of your training is all geared towards the technical stuff. Very, very little has ever been aimed at managing people and understanding how to manage people.
Yeah, I think you nail on the head there. It is because until that point in our careers, we've been driven to become experts at what we're doing. And then to suddenly become responsible for other people who are becoming expert in what they're doing is a very big shift. And actually, there's very little packaged around helping us to achieve that step. There may be some leadership and development stuff. There may be some psychometric profiling. There may be a company day out with with an adventure, trying to cross a river with some barrels and planks of woods or something like that. But that's a lot less than the effort that went into becoming an expert. And I think that's probably why. And also being a manager is a more kind of conceptual, esoteric thing than being an expert at a very specific task.
Certainly for me, looking back to the 1990s when I became a manager, most of what I learned was through the poor example of the leaders of the firm. who didn't, in those days, they had very set ways of doing things. So it was more a case of, if I get to the point where I'm running a firm, what I will do is not what they do.
Yes.
I think, Rob, you make a good point there as well. And we talk about just going back to what you said there about responsibility. If you're responsible for people, I think there's two bits to that. Not only are you going to be responsible for people, as in perhaps a caring, a holistic, are you okay way, because it's almost that maternal aspect to responsibility. You could say, having just become a grandfather, they are my children and I need to look after them to make sure, but what you do become is responsible for the actions of those people. And that's probably where the greatest conflict occurs, because you're responsible, you'll be judged on the actions of someone in your team. So if you've not successfully got them all on the same journey, then that's a pitfall that's waiting to happen for you. And it's a conflict piece, because again, my numbers, it's over 50% of those in middle management say that the role just brings more conflict, and they spend a
And
disproportionate amount of time trying to deal with that.
and I think what happens there is, because you've been an expert and you now know you're responsible for the outcomes of that team or those individuals, and their actions don't result in the outcome you want. If they're not doing it the way you did it, then that must be what's wrong, which is where the inability to let go comes from.
Mm.
It's a
There's
lack of
no other.
it's a lack of evolution on your part, in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah,
The doer who becomes a manager, ultimately, the behavior they might resort to is micromanaging.
yeah. I think what we've just talked about is where that comes from. Is that they come from a place of expertise and they've become a manager, and therefore they probably think that everything they've learnt in how to do that expert role is how it should be done. And therefore, if anybody who's working with them or for them is doing it in a different way, then that's wrong. And therefore, they start to pick at aspects of it to try and bring it into line, as it were.
What parts of your team glued would address that kind of how do we bring that on? How does your VR aspect help?
There are two levels on which I'd answer that. So that the first and simplest one to answer is, we're imbuing an adventurous activity, an alternative to crossing a river with barrels and planks, with this VR scenario and behavioral modeling, but we're imbuing it with learning because of that behavioral modeling. So not only are they having that exciting, tension bringing, competitive experience and immersive, but they're also doing it in full awareness of what their behavioral inclination is and what the behavioral inclinations of others are. And they're being given the opportunity to flex their behavior. And therefore, all of that is going to be far more memorable than if they're just sat at a desk.
So, in terms of management training, we've all been on courses, come away with the pack of notes, which then goes to sit on your bookshelf. The key thing here is avoiding the scenario, which is that often most leadership training ends up in disappointment. You do the course, learn what you learn, then you're back to the coalface. Very difficult to actually put it in play.
Yeah, and I hope what we're doing here, there are other ways of doing this, but I hope what we're doing here is giving people the opportunity to practice altering their behavior from that which they would ordinarily do. One, to prove it's safe. Two, and two, to prove they can do it. And three, hopefully, that actually it can bring a better outcome.
Two things which have worked for my previous firm very well was personality profiling and an exercise of 360 feedback. The 360 feedback was a really interesting exercise, but with the personality profiling, which was Myers-Briggs, I think, that we used. So we at least understood why certain members of the team, myself included, thought in certain ways and acted in certain ways. And I know you're into this, Simon, because the yellow growth company, yellow is a key factor for you.
Absolutely, that's a defining colour in my life, according to everyone around me. So hence why it's called the Yellow Growth Company, and that outgoing conversational approach is obviously key to all that I do. I can even see Rob smiling. Your VR experience is an opportunity to drift from, say, yellow to blue, from red to green. So you have that safe environment where you can perhaps challenge yourself to learn how you might communicate with the opposite colour better.
That's absolutely it. And we've purposely created the model so it can plug into, it can dovetail with Insights, DISC, Myers-Briggs. And in fact, we've just delivered a program to a leadership pathway, and they're using DISC. So we altered the materials we were using to correlate to the DISC colors. And the beauty here is that we're using animals as well as colors. And the animals are cute little illustrated figures, and they become quite relatable, quite fun. You feel a bit affection about them. You know, we've got a panther, a koala, a meerkat, and a fox.
Suddenly flashed up in my subconscious. Was it Steve Coogan, was it Gareth the salesman, and you're a tiger? Something like that. Anyway,
But in a
rapidly
in a
coming
very
back to the
subtle
point.
way there, Rob, whereas traditionally you'd have had that label of being red, blue, green, yellow, and the very clear definition of what those types are, your process is really making all of those much softer and much more appealing.
And giving people the opportunity to realize there are other behaviors and to actually interact with them and to realize that their own behavior will shift, regardless of whether they actually want it to or not. If they just lean on their inclinations, it will shift. But the realization that, yeah, we can actually step back from it from a moment and say, well, actually, would reacting like that or doing it in that particular way have an abrasive conflict generating? Would it disrupt an innovative process? Would it get in the way of productivity? Would it stop the team dynamic from working as well as it was? Could I do something that adds to all of that rather than detracts from it?
Of the courses and the sessions that you've run so far, what would you say would be something that has come out of that that people are taking away in terms of how they might make a change in their approach?
Well, we have some video evidence of this from participants. I think it is that even with, for instance, learning and development professionals who have been on it, that far deeper appreciation of their inclination and therefore a deeper belief that they can shift it, that don't have to just act like that, that there is an opportunity to say, oh, well, I don't have to feel that way. I can think about it differently and react about it differently. And that will actually bring about a different outcome and a different way that I feel about it. One of the reasons why I think we won the Innovate UK grant for the product is that we found a piece of research from the CIPD and ACAS that said every organisation loses £1,000 per head, per employee, per year to conflict. And we believe our product stands a very good chance of helping people deal with conflict in a constructive way rather than an abrasive, negative, deconstructive way.
And so often, one small bit of conflict within a team can have a domino effect that impacts a whole line of people with unintended consequences.
So, what is a recent experience where we had a client who I know had had a bad experience in a deal and then joined a review meeting, and I could tell that his behavior in that meeting had been impacted by the bad deal. He became quite bullying. And I think there's an example of a situation where somebody had an opportunity to step back and say, I'm feeling like this at the moment. If I take this into the meeting and act in that way, it's not going to be helpful.
Okay.
And I need to switch from being, in our instance, a panther to becoming perhaps a koala or a meerkat or a fox. And then the other one was that we've touched on it a couple of times about family. And what's really interesting is that one of the connections we've made is with a charity in Coventry who deals with families that are under stress, families that are in conflict and things like that. And we're trying to find a way of funding doing a Teams Glued for them. And the person that runs that charity refers to the family as your first team. And the point she's making is it's twofold. This is if you can work out how to be a great team member in your family, not only is that great for your family and everybody in it and the impact they can have on the world, but it also means that when you go into the workplace, you'll stand a far better chance of being a great team member there.
And brilliant. And obviously your team glued approach as well. We don't tend to if I'm yellow at work, I don't tend to suddenly become red at home. I don't change. So they are so closely linked, aren't they? I think that's really important. You learn a lot. Well, I think you learn a lot of lessons when your kids are young, growing up, because it puts your feet back on the ground sometimes when you realize that you can't. They won't respond to you know something you might do at work where you're able to perhaps tell someone to do something. They won't necessarily respond in the same way. So I think there's a lot of learning that crosses both there.
Yeah.
So, Rob, with your Teams Glued offering with VR, why does simulation work and what was the inspiration for developing it?
Well, it works because it's more than role play. You get, and in this instance, in things like VR and XR, you get immersed in a circumstance. So in this instance, there are actually two levels of immersion. The most obvious one is in the headset. And actually, each team only has one headset, so not everybody's in a headset. They can swap the headset around, but when you're in the headset, you're utterly immersed in a railway carriage. So that's one level of immersion. But then the next level of immersion is that you're a member of a team competing against a bunch of other teams in the room against the clock to stop a train that's in the headset hitting the buffers. And you've got to help the person, whoever happens to be in the headset at that moment, help them get through four carriages to stop it from hitting the buffers. And there's all this pressure going on around you as well. And so yeah, the two levels of immersion. And then you, as a member of that team, you're collectively acting to try and resolve these puzzles that allow you to get through the carriages. That means trying to decipher physical puzzles that have got words and images and colors and numbers and whatnot, work out who's best to do what, work out who's best to wear the headset, all whilst realizing I'm carrying a badge of my behavioral profile here or my behavioral inclination. This is what they're expecting of me, but is that's what's going to be helpful in the circumstances? It's really immersive, really active, a bit stressful, and therefore all of that becomes far more memorable than sitting there in front of a PowerPoint
Yep.
or ticking boxes in a psychometric profile. I'm not saying that's wrong. This is an overlay to things like psychometrics, and that's exactly how we're delivering it at the moment as part of a program of DISC in a leadership pathway.
So bits of training that I've had over the years that have involved elements of role playing, they tend to be quite stressful for all involved because you've got the person who's, at the center of it, but other people are then having to play a role as well. So with the VR simulation, does that help that?
I think what really makes it work is the fact that you have to form a team really quickly.
Okay.
So you have to start acting as a team really quickly. Otherwise, it just won't work. And I've not had, we've done this half a dozen times already with must be around about 20 different teams, and never has a team not formed,
So you
and
so
never
you don't go
never
into
has.
this then with one person being right. You're the new manager. This is how we're going to help you develop. It's looking for leaders to emerge naturally or for a team. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Although there is a circumstance in which you could say, well, okay, as a team, you're going to need to nominate who is which behavioral profile, who is which behavioral inclination. You could do it that way.
But it sounds as though if the train is heading towards the the buffers at a breakneck speed, you haven't got long to make your mind up how you're going to do it and who's going to take the
Well,
role.
yeah, and that's part of what creates the pressure. And then
Yeah.
added to that is that as each team gets through a carriage, we announce it with a horn, a honking horn, and say which team has got through which carriage, so other teams know if they're behind. And
I think as well, it's interesting when you get to that bit, Rob, that whether you are a panther, a fox, in that moment, the need to work together as a team could supersede a fair chunk of your behavioural inclination. You've got to be a team in the moment, right there.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's that bit is missing from
Right.
our collective efforts here. I need to, nobody else is doing the words, I'll do the words.
This is a really interesting example, I think. Is it the slightly larger organization this fits best with?
From an affordability point of view, possibly.
Yeah.
But I think it works as well with smaller businesses. You asked earlier about where the idea of simulation came from. It probably came from Coventry University because we went to the simulation center there. I mean, probably must be maybe 10 years ago. It's near where my business partner used to live. We saw a simulation going on there. And then when we were starting to come up with the idea for what was actually at the time a networking event, we were working with the Dean for Business in the Arts and Humanities. And they happened to be launching the Delia Derbyshire building, which is their centre of the metaverse. And there's XR, VR, hack rooms, AI, all of that in this purpose-built space. And I saw some VR and I thought, that might be interesting to try and get people engaged around. They started coming up with ideas for, some form of sort of challenge within the headset. And then I thought, well, what if we put behavioral modeling over this? And David and I have done DISC and Insights, and we've had the reports, and we have referred back to them, but they'd be far more memorable and far more believable if we could actually act on them. So that's kind of where that came from.
If we have a scenario then, Rob, where somebody listening or watching this podcast, let's say they manage a team of 30 people, what can they start doing in a different way tomorrow morning then, which is going to have an impact?
Yeah, so you primed me with this and said, what, 3 things? So I've got 3 things. The first is realize their own behavioral inclinations, or as the example I gave earlier, realize how they're feeling at the moment that they're about to embark upon resolving an issue or embarking upon a new project or something, and think about how you're feeling or how you're intending behaving about that. And then the second thing is think about how other people might behave or feel about the circumstance you're going to encounter, get involved in. And then the final thing, there's probably a fourth thing as well, but the final of the 3 would be how would I alter my position given my reflection on my own feeling and behavioral inclination and my assessment of other people's behavioral inclination and feelings? How might I alter that feeling or behavior to bring about a better outcome from those circumstances? Could shifting it be a positive impact on the circumstances? Should I be aggressive, forthright? Should I be the team player and gather people around?
We talked about the competence cliff, this being sort of how this form of VR interaction can help managers better in the workplace. I think for me, in my head, the number one skill that middle managers require is adaptive communication. And I think everything that Rob's spoken about can assist in developing that. I mean, ultimately, what have you got to do? You've got to translate the goals of the senior team to the team around you so that they can all pull in the same direction. But you're always a buffer. You're never going to get away from that, are you? You're the ultimate buffer in the business. From the people at the top who set the goals and set the direction, you somehow have got to filter out the noise and deliver some outcomes. That falls onto you. And our starting point was, your article is why mid-level managers struggle under pressure. You put those 3 things together, and that's a huge pressure valve there. So your VR experience is how can we get the best from those people? I think it's absolutely critical. Whether you're a big business, whether you're a small business, you've got to get the best from those people in order to move forward in your business.
Yeah, I think you've hinted at it there. Realizing these abilities to choose different ways of approaching problems can equally be used to benefit in the managing upwards that you spoke about. as well as with the team that you're working with or members of your staff, whichever way you want to look at it.
Our other partner in this project, Simon, Richard Miller, in our time as fellow partners at Daffins, he had a very good approach to these things. And if there was a difficult situation or we were having to manage some form of conflict, he would always start off with, what's the definition of success? Start with the end in mind.
Yeah.
What are we trying to achieve here? And how can we therefore modify our approach from this point forward to increase our probability of achieving what we are trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, the end in mind with my backdrop of my hockey changing room is a huge sporting analogy as well. And it's not just one great big end in mind. It's that series of many, many mini ends in minds. And when you're in the workplace, it's very often the smallest of tasks where you need to start with the end in mind. As a sort of middle manager, I think you have to recognize yourself that it is impossible to know everything. So you've got to learn the art of collaboration.
So,
Yeah.
Rob, is there one leadership behaviour then that you've personally had to learn under pressure?
There is one leadership behavior I've had to learn under pressure, and that is the ability to bite my lip and shut up, listen, and pause. That then gives you, one, it gives the other party or the other situation a chance to play out, because we may be predicting what the outcome of it is, and you don't like the look of what the outcome looks like it's going to be. But it also gives you that opportunity to say, I was going to do this. Could doing something else be better, or could doing nothing be better? But listening and pausing are the two most valuable things I've learned.
I agree. I'd go, there's an electronic pause as well. It's like, don't reply to an email when you're a bit sort of furious about it. You know, so you got to stop yourself, walk away, have a think about it, park it till you can construct, if you're choosing to respond electronically, of course, and not being big enough and bold enough to perhaps head that off or tackle it face to face. It's like an electronic version of what you're saying. You got to stop yourself, haven't you? You go, oh, and think things through.
And to misquote Mr. Miller, Richard Miller, yet again, something Richard and I used, HALT, being an acronym, HALT. So you've got a difficult situation, conflict, got something that could blow up, HALT. So don't jump into something if you're hungry, angry, late, or tired. So yeah, it's that.
Yeah,
But HALT,
very good.
HALT, and start with the end in mind.
But inebriated is fine.
I think that might be the tired bit.
It's quite fascinating we've spoken about this today, because I attended a well-being session yesterday. And a lot of the aspects that we've spoken about here, there's a massive read across to some of the thoughts and issues and challenges that came out of well-being. Of course, the minute you say well-being, everyone presumes that's a health thing. But this was well-being, a lot of talk about how we interact with other people. That has an impact on their well-being. The links between what you're doing here in the VR, the simulation world, what we're trying to do here is to get those middle managers who struggle under that pressure. How can we recognize how we might be able to help them better, get them to perform better, get the teams to perform better? It is all loops back into elements of that well-being piece as well, because how you talk to your colleague, people often don't forget the way that you've spoken to them. It takes an awful long time for those kind of things to be mitigated. So really important in that well-being piece as well.
Teams Glued is a great opportunity to actually get people back into the workplace, even if it's just for this one event.
Yeah.
And in doing that, because of the nature of Teams Glued, you prove to them that getting together is good, teamwork is good, and people are capable of it. And actually getting back into the office is good as well.
Yeah.
And I've got a case in point. We first delivered this in its embryonic form before we got the Innovate UK funding to develop all our own materials around it. We delivered it to a fintech in Solihull to 50 of their middle level managers. And these guys, coders and programmers, so a lot of them were introverts. And the CEO leant into me during the program and he said, there are several people here today that I haven't seen in the office for 2 years.
So, Rob, with Teams Glue, you have a series of demos running over the next few weeks and months. How can people find out more?
We're going to be continually putting out demos to find an audience, to find potential customers. So we're going to be doing it probably on a quarterly basis. And all they need to do is look at our website. It'll be a headline item on the Teams Glued website.
And a link probably up there, if I get
Yeah,
your
it's actually
right.
a strip across the top at the moment, a strip across the top. But yeah, they're full versions of the event, but they're intended for people who might be considering using it either as a standalone piece or as part of a wider learning and development program, to give them a real feel for what it's like and what the impacts are and how they can get the best use out of it.
Well, thank you, Rob, for joining us today. It's been really interesting. Simon, before we go, do you have a final statistic for us?
A final statistic. Now you've put me on the spot. Oh, here we go. Here. This was from Simon Sinek, and he was talking about middle management. 41% of their time is actually spent managing people. 44% of the time was spent at meeting, and the rest is admin. So we've got to create more time to do better things. I was kind of amazed at the amount of middle management time that is spent doing some admin and attending meetings that probably don't help them that much. So this is a perfect opportunity to get under the skin of that and make some changes.
Could I just add one thing then? Given the stats that Simon started with and the flatter structures and the more even sort of less hierarchical approach, I don't think this is just about benefits for managing. This is also benefits about being a team player, about how to be a dynamic individual and team player.
Absolutely.
And with the remaining whatever percentage, they should spend more time watching podcasts or listening to podcasts, all of which will help them stay 3 steps ahead.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Rob. 3 steps ahead. We'll be back in a few weeks. We will see you then. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you too. Thank you for allowing me to be part of it.
Thank you, Rob. That's great.
Thanks, Rob.
I've got some really good stuff there. So yeah. Anyway, cheers, guys.